Transducers live, ready to strive. You're listening to Little Samson on Overshock. Released in the year of our Lord 1992 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, this game is notable for only two things: being constantly cited as a Mega Man clone, and being rarer than the Holy Grail. Just doing a quick search online lists some of the most ridiculous price spreads for a late-in-the-game NES title ever, with some of the most notorious ones on eBay being over $5,000. I mean, back in 1990, Monkey Island taught us that we should never pay more than $20 for a computer game, but I guess that doesn't count for obscure Japanese console games. As a short aside, due to inflation, it's actually more around $40. Don't believe me? Just search Monkey Island inflation online and go nuts. Now, the reason behind this is most likely twofold. Little Samson, or known in its home country as Teirei Densetsu Rikuru, is an obscure import game from a little-known startup helmed by a cadre of disgruntled former Capcom employees that only lasted 4 years, and it was released at the tail end of a console generation when the system it was released for was already on its way out the door. Now, by the time Little was released in Japan, the Super Nintendo was already out for about a year, so when it came to importing the game for English-speaking territories, nobody could have possibly given less of a shit.
Dodson! Dodson! We've got Dodson here! Nobody cares.
So, if you were the one kid still picking up NES games in '92 and you got this seemingly unsuspecting title off the store shelf, it must have really felt like coming in 5th place at a StarCraft tournament circa 2011. Right off the bat, one thing we need to address is that almost everywhere I look, I find people knocking this one as some sort of dime-a-dozen Mega Man clone. Like, it was somehow a bootleg instead of its own fully fledged game in a genre of action-oriented platformers. If you were to compare this to the likes of a game such as Creon Quest, which literally was a Mega Man ripoff, maybe then you'll see where I'm coming from when I try to give this game some slack. This is kind of like that dark era of gaming where before we came up with the term first-person shooter, everybody and their mother just called them Doom clones or Doom ripoffs. Even though Doom was a technical follow-up to the likes of Wolfenstein and Spear of Destiny, which were aping off of earlier games like Catacomb 3D and Hover Tank. The very first sentence on the game's Wikipedia article just straight up calls it a Mega Man clone. Something that probably only adds more fuel to the fire for comparison was that the company that produced Little Samson, Kikira, later to be called Sir to Wave near the end of its lifetime, was a company in Tokyo that was staffed by a lot of former Capcom alumni, such as the actual director of the first two Mega Man games, Akira Kitamura. But he didn't work on Little Samson. Kitamura is instead credited as the director for another Takeru/Sir to Wave title that didn't even make it out of Japan called Kokoron. Instead, this game was purportedly developed by another notable Capcom staff member, Shinichi Yoshimoto, who was one of the designers on both the original Ghosts and Goblins as well as the first Strider game. Look, it's not like I'm blind and I can't see that there are comparisons to be made to the Mega Man franchise. I mean, the main character has a 3-round burst shot that looks like the Mega Buster pellets. The dragon has a charge shot like a Mega Man 4. Rockbiter over here has a melee attack like Power Mega Man's punch attack in Mega Man 6. There's a Wily Tower style finale when you rematch all of the game's previous bosses, pickups that increase your maximum health like Heart Tanks in Mega Man X, and there's even these potions which work in a very similar way to E-Tanks as well. But really, the comparisons are surface level at best, and there's numerous other Capcom titles I can point to that also serve as an equal inspiration for this game, with a fair bit of other features and mechanics that don't even have anything to do with other Mega Man games. For instance, Little Samson is largely a linear experience where each level is played in a sequence. However, there are a handful of alternate paths, like in Castlevania 3. And much like in Bubble Bobble, the final levels of the game are inaccessible unless the player is playing on a higher difficulty. This really makes it largely pointless to even bother with the easier difficulty setting, as defeating the final boss only leads to a teaser for the actual final stage you'll never even really get to play. The only major differences you'll notice between the two modes is how each character's health caps at a higher maximum when compared to normal. When any of your heroes pick up a crystal ball, their maximum health permanently increases by 2 points for the rest of the game, or at the very least until you reset and have the game over. This is, of course, because the game doesn't feature a battery backup, and uses a password system common amongst a lot of NES games. So, as per usual, this can be kind of frustrating starting the game over after having turned it off, as none of the passwords remember your current inventory of items from when you last left off, which includes your potions. And potions are really important for getting through the harder segments of the game, since when each character picks one up, they can use it from the menu to restore their health by a select amount. And if one of your characters happens to die mid-level, you can revive them with their potions so you can keep playing as them for the rest of the stage. However, in spite of my minor griping, Little Samson's password system is actually incredibly convenient at being only 14 letters long, which makes them a lot easier to memorize, as well as more economical to input into the game when compared to the likes of King's Bounty or River City Ransom. Not only that, there's also a short series of novelty passwords that act like cheat codes, including one for a sound test menu, two quick start passwords, each for levels 1, 13, and 16, which begin you with a full inventory of health and potions for all your characters, as well as a warp to the final tower of the game, but on the easiest difficulty setting, which you would normally not be able to access otherwise. Booting this game up from scratch, we are greeted by a group of sorcerers being let out of their mountainside prison by a stray thunderbolt as they set out to conquer the kingdom of the Imperial 4G. Yeah, not so much Camelot or Carnaria, but the Imperial 4G. At least that's what the manual refers to it as, which sounds less like a fantastical kingdom and more like a translation error. The monarch of this realm, Emperor Hans, then calls upon for 4 defenders to aid him in his time of crisis with a series of carrier pigeons. He finds the foursome of warriors due to some sort of prophecy of them wielding magical bells or something. This game seems to have a particular obsession with bells, as it's also the main character's weapon of choice. Now, I know that, perhaps, a sword might have seemed a tad, what's the word? Stereotypical when it came to our action fantasy romp. But, you know what? At least those tend to kill things! Man, it just feels at odds with the cover of the game showing him firing bolts of energy out of his clenched fists.
My cock is so hard!
He fires them laterally in whatever direction he's facing, with 3 allowed on screen at any given time. They seem fairly weak at first, since they're just, sleigh bells and all. But if you got yourself a turbo controller, you can shotgun them all at once to deal some decent amount of damage to bosses and enemies. However, the one thing that's actually consistent about Little/Samson, whatever, is his training as a mountaineer and his ability to climb walls and ceilings. Something that the kid does completely freehand. Something that requires a level of dexterity and physical strength that only the real-life Spider-Man of Karnataka can match. It's actually pretty impressive mechanically as well, since Samson can do this almost effortlessly, and it makes him incredibly mobile in confined spaces. This is also very similar to how Strider moves in the arcade version of the game, and was actually something the NES version of the game couldn't bother to get working right. The only other game before Mega Man X and Contra 3 that got wall climbing to work were the other Gargoyles quests, and even Firebrand couldn't climb on fucking ceilings, now could he? Just jump onto any flat surface and Samson will stick to it like glue. Well, unless, of course, it's ice, like in the Frozen Palace stage, where he will slowly slide off it ever so much. Samson's also got the best jump out of the 4 characters, and it's not just because of the neat little spinning animation the game likes to show off at every possible convenience, but it's actually due to its control and height. Samson and his friends don't have momentum like in Mario Brothers, so the height of their jumps is changed by tapping or holding on the jump button. Tap for a little bit to hop to bob underneath enemies and projectiles, and hold it to get some height and leap over gaps and triangle jump between pillars. I think it's a good enough time now to mention that Little Samson was actually published by the Taito Corporation. Mostly due to the fact that I think Kikira's sprite here kind of reminds me of good old Bub and Bob with her squat, super deformed posture and all that. Kikira, the Dragon Lord, was once a human girl. Much like in the myth of Arachne, however, Kikira was cursed to become a dragon for her arrogance and selfishness. Though I suppose getting turned into a dragon doesn't sound nearly as bad as being turned into a spider, especially since her dragon form comes with a nifty fireball attack and the power of flight. She's actually one of the most notable characters in the game due to a few choice moments in the game's story, like how she's actually the game's first boss and the only playable character you ever fight against. only for her to then go through a change of heart in the game's finale and rescue the gang from a collapsing castle. She controls very similarly to Firebrand from the Gargoyles Quest series, in that she can fly at any point by pressing the A button while already in the air, but only in a horizontal angle. But unlike Firebrand, her movement is far more limited while in the air, as she can't latch into walls and her flight only lasts a few seconds. This can actually make flying fairly tricky as Kikira, since she can get stuck into some pretty dangerous spots. Mostly really frustrating ones, like just underneath the corner of ledges where she's helpless to climb up onto. This is really weird, since the very first thing listed in her controls in the game's manual are her sharp claws that she can use to grip onto surfaces. And she can't use them to climb onto walls? I mean, Firebrand uses his claws to grip into walls, and Samson can apparently climb walls with his bare hands. But I guess the dragon isn't tough enough to lift her fat ass off the fucking ledge. This is a little disconcerting at first, up until you master the powers of quickly switching between the other characters, as that can be done rather instantaneously, and it can even be done mid-air. This will become more important when we talk about Gamm in a little bit, but you can swap to Samson mid-flight to try and save yourself if you just so happen to make a jump a little too low and need to climb up onto a ledge. But despite any of its setbacks, it's still the power of flight in a platforming game, and that makes her invaluable for clearing long gaps. Something else invaluable about a Kikira is her Fire Breath attack, as it can be charged 3 levels to deal extra damage, kinda like the Mega Buster in later Mega Man games, and its unique arc can actually be used to hit enemies just underneath her from atop a ledge. This makes her the go-to for speedy boss kills, as she can deal a lot of damage within a short amount of time, with the size and curve of her shot often able to hit weak points without having to necessarily move into harm's way. Another go-to situation for Kikira is in the Ice Palace, which is like the only time there's a level made of ice with slippery surfaces in the entire game. Every other character slides with annoying ice physics, while Kikira doesn't and can walk on the ice normally. It's nice and all, but how is this such a major highlight to her character, to the point that it gets so much lip service in the game's manual, and is only ever really used in a single point in the game? Regardless, it seems her major weakness comes from how vulnerable she can be. She has the second lowest health cap between Samson and the rest of his crew, which makes her kind of a glass cannon of sorts when it's paired with her lethality and maneuverability. This is in contrast with her fellow combat-heavy squatty being Gamm the Rock Lord, who, when he's not fighting the GoBots, is the bulkiest character in the party, with the highest possible health in the game. His thick skin is so potent, I've actually found myself able to reliably kill a few bosses by just tanking all their blows and punching them until they die with Gamm. The manual states that, much like Kikira, he too was once human. He robbed a wizard and stole from him a magic potion that eventually turned him to stone. And since it's kinda hard to be a cat burglar when you're a boulder man, he gave up his criminal ways and decided to repent for his crimes off in the mountains. Despite the odd choice of randomly eating a turn yourself to stone potion, that's a pretty neat backstory, and his rock form looks like Gunrock's transform state from the Power Stone games. So I like to imagine that that's what his human form would have looked like when he, was still human. And, just like Gunrock, Gamm's fighting style is just sheer brute force, where he pummels his opponents with his stretchy arm fists that have a pretty decent range and allow him to attack in 4 different directions. And, unlike those incompetent bumblers of the Belmont clan, he can attack directly downward from on top of a platform to hit enemies beneath him. Alongside his large health pool, Gamm carries a unique resistance to spikes, being completely invulnerable to them and capable of walking across them unharmed. This actually makes him one of the strongest characters not only in his own game, but pretty much any video game ever made, since last time I checked, spikes usually kill most super fighting robots, plumbers, hedgehogs, monkeys, acrobatic circus bats, combat-capable amphibians, vampire hunters, space bounty hunters, Mortal Kombat champions, ninjas, samurais, hyper-intelligent dolphins, half-genie hybrids, Tomb Raiders, and any and all legendary heroes of time, wind, essence, light, twilight, skies, the wilds, or seasons. It helps give him some well-needed utility in the platforming parts of the game, due to how he has a pretty hard time clearing gaps with his low jump height, and his slow movement speed makes it hard for him to dodge through enemy attacks. And, unlike Kikira's once-per-game non-ice slipping powers, there's tons more spikes in this game, including mandatory spiked platforms you need the big guy to jump onto, or alternative paths lined with spikes that would damage the other characters to walk over. The one thing that really holds the guy back, though, is his girth. Rockbiter here is a real thick, stony boy who can't cram himself through any tight spaces, especially since he's the only character in the game who can't actually duck. That job is actually reserved for the final member of our Little Samson crew named KO, the Enchanted Beast. KO is a wizard. In fact, he is the same wizard who was mugged by Gamm and turned him into the ever-loving blue-eyed thing.
No, Vic. It's clobbering time.
And in the Kingdom of the Imperial 4G, the only escape plan is to chug. So, KO downs one of his own potions and is transformed into a mouse. Now, despite this setback, KO retains much of his wizardry in his transform state with the 7th level spell, Delayed Fire Blast. Bombs that he can drop behind himself 4 at a time that explode into 3 small micro-explosions directly next to each other. This doesn't seem too dreadfully useful at first, since with KO's piss-poor health cap, he's likely to die in a single hit from just about any kind of attack in the game. However, KO's main weapon isn't his explosive magic, but his newly adopted size. The best way for him to fight is simply not fighting at all. Being the smallest character in the game, about as tall as Samson and Kikira while they're ducking, alongside the fastest moving member of the group, this allows for KO to easily slip through the attacks of numerous enemies that would have clipped the heels of the other 3 characters. The manual also mentions that he's so light that he can run on water, although much like Kikira's anti-ice claws, I can't remember too many times this ability was really that big a deal, or even came into play that much at all. Now, with his lack of any durability whatsoever, you would think KO is utterly useless against any of the bosses in the game. And for the ones that don't sit still, this would be absolutely correct. But since most of them are clunky meat sponges that don't move around so much, KO has a neat trick where he can plant all of his bombs over top of each other so that all of the explosions end up going off at once. If you manage to time this just right, it hits the boss for a sizable amount of damage while KO is already left out of the way for some decent hit-and-run tactics. There's actually a secret in this game where if you kill the Cyclops boss at the beginning of the game with KO, you immediately skip all the way to level 7 like it's some kind of Super Mario warp pipe.
Kill him! Kill him! Kill him!
Those are our 4 playable characters for this game, and while I'm aware that this might be because of how late this game came out in the NES's life cycle, they all control fairly well. Everybody is equipped with anything they need to deal with whatever the game can throw at you, and for what one hero lacks, it is made up for with the abilities of another. There's no Medusa head swerving into you outside of your possible attack range to cheap shot you. No dumbass repeating level mazes. All of your shots land where they're supposed to, and while the game's bosses can be kind of difficult and rather intimidating, their patterns are predictable, and as long as you keep focused, you could win without taking a single blow. But clearly I'm gushing. So, to play devil's advocate, I'll say that certain enemies still respawn endlessly, and there's a term for games with bullshit difficulty called kusoge, which literally means shit game. And on the spectrum of NES games, from Convoy no Nazo to Little Samson, Little Samson is as far from a kusoge as you could possibly get. Little Samson has just around 21 levels overall, with 4 at the beginning dedicated to each character, 13 main levels throughout the course of the game, and 4 endgame levels at the end of the normal mode, and a secondary B level as an alternate ending to level 4. So come on down to the Imperial 4G! We've got ice, bones, skeletons, temples constructed entirely out of Nickelodeon gack, our beautiful coastline filled with nothing but hurricanes, active volcanoes that spew magma directly into our atmosphere blotting out the sun, and titanic, malignant crustaceans. The 4 intro levels can be played in any order, and are the only levels that you have to play as each of the characters solo. Each intro stage ends with the 4 heroes meeting one of the Emperor's guards to take them to the palace and set them out on their quest to defeat the sorcerers and save the kingdom of the Imperial 4G. And it must be really awkward being appointed to save the world alongside the guy that tried to mug you. And Kikira's little hissy fit in the throne room would also make things a little uncomfortable around the campfire later on in the quest. The graphics and sprite of this game are stellar too, with great details and animations on almost every character, monster, and location. I love all the enemy designs in this game too, like these bubble-spitting gremlins that shrink when they loose their gumball attack at you, the tiny toad monsters that transform into these giant horned demons, and these demonic fountains that are just set dressing until they get possessed by these flaming spirits, just to name a few. But that's nothing when compared to the game's bosses, and there's quite an assortment of them, with the majority of them comprised of the 5 wizards who escaped in the game's opening sequence, each being a specific color and sporting this nifty teleport animation, alongside a monstrous second form that they bring out when their health bar hits 0 the first time. The green wizard in the beginning is a massive cyclops with homing energy blasts that go on forever. The blue wizard is a knight with lightning blasts and geese-howard ground waves. Yellow is Death himself, who can and will instantly kill you on contact with this awesome intro where he slashes through the veil of space-time to fight you, and the red wizard is a massive fuck-off dragon from hell and one of the largest sprites in the game. Not just this game, mind you, any game, every game. I'm pretty sure if we had a good look at how long this fucking dragon was, it would be scaling off your TV down to the floor. He has the nasty habit of ramming into the platforms you're forced to fight him on, which deals so much damage it pretty much kills most characters on normal mode. But you can trick him into staying at the bottom of the screen where he can't get you nearly as easily. And if that's not enough, there's this glowing tower of green evil skulls, a water nymph that got the poison treatment with a sex change in the Western release, a skeletal horseman, and this water dragon called the Tidal Worm that is honestly one of the coolest looking monsters you'll ever see on the NES. I can't talk about the nymph boss without mentioning the trick in his water stage, where if you fall off the edge of it, instead of dying like in every other instance this happens, you end up trapped in a new substage and is forced to play the entire level without his companions. Except for Crabbro, of course. He's always going to be there for you, in order to get them back. Besides being the only level, besides the introductory stages where you're forced to play as Samson alone, Crab Ride is also notable for being the only stage in the entire game without a password. So if you game over here, you're forced to start level 4 all over again, and just do your best to not fall into the gaps in between the arena on the Nymph's boss fight. The last boss you would normally fight on the easy mode is the Golden Wizard, who pulls off some impressive perspective attacks when he transforms into this bizarre dragon skull form and flies to the far off end of the background to pelt the arena with energy blasts. He's also the only one of the wizards with a third form, as he starts off the battle transformed into a staff. However, if you decide to challenge yourself, congratulations! You're not done yet. Get your ass through normal mode and you'll be greeted by Takid's Floating Castle, a fortress that emerges from the lake in the middle of the world map, floating ominously in the clouds like it's the moon of Mordor or some shit. And man, you do not fuck around at Takid's Castle, as it's a bullshit death trap filled with spikes, disappearing block platforms, and skeletons.
They actually do have skeletons. What the fuck?
Here, you have to fight the 4 normal wizards, thankfully sans the gold wizards, in their monster forms one after the other. The architecture and the stained glass windows for the backgrounds in this level are straight out of Castlevania, so if anything else, you can say Takid at least has good taste when it comes to home decor. I mean, you know this is a villain with class, or at least a flair for the dramatic. There he is, sitting atop his throne in a casual, laid-back pose, like he couldn't give 2 shits about you storming through his fortress. Even when he starts his attack, it's just this lackadaisical flick of his wrist. I guess it might be the gothic scenery getting to me, but I got the sneaking suspicion Takid might be a vampire. His attacks all carry a health-draining side effect, like when he fires this red energy sphere, which is the only attack he has in his first form, you have a few seconds to destroy it before it pops and it sucks some of your life away, and then gives it back to him. Now, much like the other wizards, Takid can transform into this floating Dullahan form after he removes his cape. Here, he's armed with a sword that fires his blood projectile in a 3-way barrage, and then in a wide arc. He can also pierce his blade into you directly from all the way across the room to siphon more of your HP. And if there is anything more unnerving than a boss healing themselves mid-fight, it's a boss that takes away your health in the process. He is certainly an intimidating encounter, with all the lightning and fighting in a throne room straight out of the Coppola Dracula movie. Definitely a worthy challenge for what you put up with to reach this point. But the real problem with this boss is that every time you die, you start from the beginning of the final castle level and have to fight your way back to the throne room each time you want a rematch. You don't really have to do this with any other boss in the game, as when you die against any of them, as long as you have an extra life handy, you'll always start back from the start of the boss fight. Of all the things to want to take away from Ninja Gaiden, constantly rehashing the post-final boss level is definitely the last thing you want to crib in your design document. Hell, 1 point goes to Ninja Gaiden right off the bat, is that at least when you get to the final boss, he stays in the last form you fought him in before you died. Now, that is something that happens in the other boss fights, where you always restart the fight from the wizard form and fight your way back to the monster form. But we had to lump the worst possible options for the final level now, didn't we? Gamm seems to be the go-to for conquering the jailbreaking sorcerer, as he easily slaps his wizard form like all the wizards prior, though the Rock Lord has the nasty habit of getting caught by the Life Suck sword because of how slow he is. Thankfully, Takid only uses this attack when he's at the opposite end of the room, but not whenever he's traveling in between it. So a possible strategy is to fire off from afar with Samson or Kikira until Takid begins to approach you, and then face him head-on with Gamm before he makes his way to the opposite end of the chamber. And unless you're a Seirei Densetsu Lickle god, KO basically fades away into dust just from looking at the bastard. Though he's invaluable for reaching the throne room, as there's small spike traps that only he can sneak through without getting perforated. I can't lie to your face and tell you his highly damaging bombs couldn't be useful, but 6 HP is a stark challenge to overcome in the final boss fight. Once you finally conquer the Prince of Darkness, we pull a straight Metroid as Takid turns out to be a load-bearing wizard and the castle starts to explode. There's no time limit or anything, but the place is crumbling with rocks and debris falling all over the place to damage you, even as you dodge the last few remaining traps still in the way. In a scene that feels like the ending of Metroid Fusion, I know it came out 10 years later, you reach the castle balcony only to be cornered by Takid like how the Omega Metroid corners Samus at the dock ship on the BSL station. And just like in that game, an unlikely ally appears to save you at the last possible minute like the SAX does, where Kikira leaps out of the magic bell to Palpatine toss Takid over the side of his own castle. It's a particularly tense moment for an NES game before the reluctant Dragoness returns to rescue you just in time for the credits. The oddest detail about this ending has to do with the black bell that descends before Takid returns. It's the same graphic used when it shows the magic bells of all the other characters. In the manual, each bell also has a distinctive color, with Samson's being white, Kikira's being blue, Gamm's is red, and the old mouse wizard has a green bell. I can only wonder that, if anything, this is supposed to imply Takid was part of some previous group of heroes who also possessed the bells and became corrupted in some way. Were he and his gang of wizards a rogue group of evil bell wielders? Does any of this speculation even matter for a 20-year-old NES game from a long-dead company?
It makes no damn sense. Compels me, though.
Probably because they actually put in some effort to tell a story in an NES game. He even actually had a slight bit of intrigue for the end, with cutscenes and everything. All of which was for naught, as Sir Wave, or Takeru, or whoever, went under shortly after this, so if there was any follow-up to this game, it certainly went up in smoke with the company. In conclusion, Little Samson is the best NES game you never played, which is sad because with its extremely obscure and limited release, there's almost no way to play this game without shilling out a small fortune. And no matter how good this game is, and it's pretty good, I can never expect someone to pay $5,000 fucking dollars for it. And due to its relative obscurity outside of hardcore game collectors, there's no hope of any kind of re-release, as I'd hope a virtual console or digital version of the game might knock the wind out of some of those price gougers on eBay to make the game a little bit more affordable. Now, of course, there's numerous ways to emulate the game, as NES emulation has been functional and reliable for over 20 years now. But if you want to try the game on proper hardware, there are a few slightly cheaper options. Besides getting a time machine to buy the game when it was brand new, you can nab yourself something like a new style NES, which is a top-loading system that plays pretty much everything, including European PAL format games. Why is this important? Well, the PAL version of Little Samson apparently had a higher distribution than the North American release, and is significantly cheaper, usually going for only around $100 to $200. Now, that is not at all cheap for a 20-year-old game that was probably a third of that price when it first came out, but when compared to the $1,000 or more of the America release, that's a bargain. There are also a series of reproduction carts that I've seen floating around online for the most reasonable price out of all of them. So if you're not opposed to having the genuinely non-genuine article, there's always that route. Ignoring all that, Little Samson is a solid title and is an absolute blast to play. It's probably one of my all-time favorite games for the system and feels like the epitome of the NES library. Like, it's a totemic representation of every classic title that came before, wrapped into this hidden little gem buried alongside other obscure titles like Metal Storm, and its fellow Takuro Wave release, Kokoron. Its sprite work and animation are some of the best for a platformer of the time. The controls are smooth and responsive, and the gameplay is fast-paced and exciting. Now, I'd like to say nothing felt better to control until the Super Nintendo came out, but the Super Nintendo was already out by the time this game hit Western soil, so... The other thing that I believe this game could have really improved on would be the music, which is its weakest point. It's a pretty mediocre soundtrack compared to the titans it stands amongst, like Blaster Master and Journey to Silius. It probably doesn't help that the game plays the same 4 songs over and over again, as those are the playable characters' themes that play whenever you happen to be playing as that respective character. Each theme feels appropriate, which is nice, and I like how every character has a distinctive theme, but it gets dull, and I wish there was a compromise where we also had awesome stage music to go along with it. It feels like, instead of getting the awesome, memorable stage music for every level in a Mega Man game, you instead got the generic, boring boss music droning through the level instead. Some of the sound effects tend to be a bit shrill as well, which is quite noticeable as my ears start to bleed every single time I hit the fire button. Thankfully, I'm not the only one that found this to be a bit of a bother, since the romhacking.net user SCD, who's probably not a furry, created a pleasant sound ROM hack for that very reason. It replaces a good number of sound effects with something a little less noticeable, and even restores a good number of censored or removed visuals that never made it to the North American localization. Now, with all that said and done, I hope that somewhere in this lengthy diatribe, I was able to convince you to give this game a chance, as I can give it my guarantee that you will not regret it. So, in spite of the legalities or monetary issues you might have to overcome in attempting to play this game, all I ask is that you remember you heard it here live on Overshock.